presidente y handover continua. Jeffrey Smith, I mean, the opposition has called for people to remain calm, lucid and vigilant and not to retreat. I mean, what happens if the people do take to the streets? Will Jammeh call a state of emergency and what happens then?
Yeah, that's very concerning and a very good question, and I think we should all be vigilant and watching what transpires in Gambia in the coming days. I think, first and foremost, the really important factor here again is that Jammeh lost the election. President-elect Barrow needs to assume power in January, a peaceful transition of power according to the Constitution. And on the issue of potential violence, even before the election, there's concern. So the early warning project at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum actually cited Gambia as having the fourth highest statistical increase in the world leading up to the elections in terms of the threat of state-led mass killing. So now with tensions rising once again, I think that is certainly an issue that we need to all be aware of. Importantly, both the African Union, the Economic Community of West African States, and the United Nations issued a joint statement saying
the one thing
a peaceful
that
Yahya Jammeh must step down in accordance with the country's own laws. And secondly, yesterday the United Nations Security Council unanimously declared the same, all 15 member states, which is very important. So the world is watching. And I think that's very important in a situation like this, where in the past, a lot of these crimes, a lot of violence, and a lot of human rights abuses committed by Jammeh and the regime have gone unnoticed. That's very different this time around, and I think that's incredibly important.
One more question on Jammeh and the Gambia before we widen our discussion. How did he come to lose his grip on power? I mean, did the opposition in Gambia outsmart him, or did his jailing of the opposition leader, Ousseynou Dabo, galvanize people against him? What happened?
No, one because I'm just...
I think there are several contributing factors to first of all, I think he was too overconfident. He has the support of the Gambia. And then before the election, he made several changes that have now come to haunt him. Like he changed the
military.
barring from running for the presidency. He set the age at 65. So that's one of the factors why Barrow came in. And then as well, he changed the law to have, instead of having two-round voting, he made it one simple majority. So if there had been a second round of voting, then probably he would have had the chance of allying with Mama Kande, who came third. He's a former member of the APRC, so probably he would have won. So all these factors, and then with the opposition, as well as the Gambian people, had enough of Jammeh excess, and as well as human rights violations, throwing people in jail. So they were really so all these contributing factors, he himself, with changing, tinkering with the constitution as well as electoral laws, that's brought his end. Well, following the so-called Cold War, democracy was thought to be flourishing across Africa. Now, though, international observers fear that democracy has stalled or is in fact being reversed. A number of authoritarian leaders across Africa hold an iron grip on power. Many are accusing the opposition of amending laws to extend their rule and overseeing rubber stamp elections. At least 16 African nations held elections this year. The transfer of power hasn't always been smooth or always representative governments. Edgar Lungu was re-elected president in Zambia in August in a poll marred by harassment of the opposition, claims of vote rigging, disputes too in Gabon. Following the election there in September, the opposition accused the Constitutional Court of a miscarriage of justice for upholding the victory of President Ali Bongo. And President Yoweri Museveni of Uganda extended his 30-year rule earlier this year in an election which international observers condemned as a sham. Jeffrey Smith, what does it take to make a positive political transition in Africa possible?
I think that's one of the tragic outcomes of the Gambia. The election results there that was announced on December 2nd, in which it was announced that now President-elect Adama Barrow had ousted one of the continent's longest-serving dictators. It provided hope not only to Gambians but people across the region and across sub-Saharan Africa. Now with this reversal, again, it puts into flux the state of democracy in the region. It dashes the hopes of millions across the region. I think if you look more broadly, one of the really interesting aspects in sub-Saharan Africa is the fact that poll after poll shows that citizens across the continent prefer electoral democracy over the alternatives. And what is missing, however, is the supply of democracy. So the demand is increasingly high, the hopes and aspirations of people remain high, but the supply of democracy remains woefully low. If you look at Freedom House studies, for instance, only 12% of citizens in sub-Saharan Africa live in a country in which democratic ideals, civil liberties, and political rights are actually protected in practice, which is very concerning. And I think, looking at West Africa in particular, in which Gambia is situated, there has been tremendous advancements, in my opinion, in terms of democracy. We saw what happened in Ghana just this week with the opposition candidates ousting the incumbent president, and we know there'll be a peaceful transfer of power there. So in West Africa, specifically, tremendous advancements being made, and again, Gambia is making headlines for all the wrong reasons. And it's really a powerful black eye on a region otherwise doing very well.
Tori, we talked about the UN Security Council, the African Union, and ECOWAS. The UN Security Council says Jammeh must hand over power without conditional delay. The African Union described his statement as null and void. Are the AU or ECOWAS competent bodies when it comes to democratic transfer of power in Africa? ECOWAS, we've seen increasingly making some very strong progress in terms of pushing for stable government and democratic transition. We saw what they did in Mali in 2012 when there was a coup. They stepped in and prepared the military to hand over to a civilian-led transition. And the military, they didn't stay for a month. We saw the same thing in Burkina Faso last year when the military wanted to disrupt the peaceful transition. They stepped in as well in Guinea-Bissau. So they've had this experience, and I think with that, one can say, probably, arguably, that the military regime in West Africa, there is a number in the sense that you can stage a coup, but you would be allowed to stay in power. I think that's a tremendous progress from the part of ECOWAS. So now ECOWAS, they do have this experience. They have leverage. They have people that can get to one of these strong men, I think, is former president of Nigeria. That's Olusegun Obasanjo. He has some levers over there. He's somebody, some of these people that should be brought in.
Jirejef, thank you so much for ringing in. Mr. Chonga.
Yeah, hello, Flex.
Jammeh doesn't want negotiation, my friend. That's the problem.
I'm just calling.
This pressure on Jammeh from now to the end of December, so that he can see.
But I think the key is here.
Jeffrey Smith, the average age of Gambia's population is 20. Many people there have no other leader. I mean, and that demographic is repeated right across West Africa and other parts of the continent.
To make sure
the demand for democracy is high. To what extent may we see a sort of African version of the Arab Spring, with people demanding democracy? Proper, true democracy.
On Friday, because we're going to demonstrate, and
I think certainly, as we were talking about previously, the demand for democracy continues to rise, and I think the Arab Spring analogy is a bit overplayed here. I think there's certainly different social and cultural dynamics at play in sub-Saharan Africa that were otherwise evident in North Africa and parts of the Middle East. But one of the concerns here, and pivoting back to Gambia a bit, is the rising tension and the rising frustrations of people who, in Gambia, for instance, went out, stood in line, and bravely voted out one of the continent's and arguably one of the world's most repressive dictators. They literally put their lives on the line to do this. And now that that's been taken away, social tensions will certainly increase. And one of the big fears there, too, is that Jammeh, over the past 22 years, has become an expert at dividing people. He has divided people certainly along political lines, along ethnic lines. For instance, before the elections, he threatened to bury the opposition 9 feet deep. Those were his own words. He threatened to kill the Mandinka ethnic group, which makes up about 40% of Gambia's population, threatening to kill them like vermin. He called them ants. So sort of conjuring this very, very horrible rhetoric that we saw in the early 1990s in Rwanda before the genocide happened there. And I'm not saying a genocide is imminent in the Gambia. These are certainly big concerns that are not only a concern for Gambia and for the region, but certainly for the United States and other vested shareholders in Gambia's future.
There, we must end it. Many thanks indeed for being with us, Jeffrey Smith and Mutala Toure.
Alone be given 3 years.
Thank you. Yeah, we're also going to end this program here. Once again, thank you very much for joining us. You are listening to the programs on Regular FM, the people against the dictator. Yes, and the dictator must go. The people will win. Yes, power to the people. Power to the coalition, power to the people of the Gambia. May peace and love, unity, yes, reign over Gambia. Good night. We see you tomorrow, 10 p.m. Inshallah. God's willing. Yes, Baljala Soma. So yes, Ansal Kana program on Betala online, on YouTube, yes, Facebook, Twitter.
People were reporting.
Alamana suto di alam bokay li ngeen doon déglu noonu mooy am Regular FM. People versus dictator. Yes, nañ fanaan jàmm. Good night. Bye.